Hello Berlin, this is Tim Lang here. I'm very, very sorry not to be with you. I have prepared a lot of slides in this talk. I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes. These are complicated slides, you can look at them later, but I want you to listen to what I'm going to say because I weave a narrative, a story, an argument through these slides. My argument is that the 20th century food system has changed extensively. It's been a huge success story. The organic movement has been part of that. There have been disagreements. More people have been fed, better food, more life expectancy and so on. But it has brought huge problems with it. We now know it's not just success, it's also problems. And the connection between the apparent success and the problems is what we now know. The environmental problems, greenhouse gases, water, land, biodiversity, soil loss. Organics is very good about soil. But on public health, we have hunger alongside malnutrition, obesity alongside malnutrition. In culture, consumer trends have gone away with themselves. People overeat, can eat anything they like, go to supermarkets which were unimaginable in 1900. And this has all been the success of the productionist policy to produce more food. But it's distorted prices, distorted availability, served consumerism which is now distorting the planet. Organics has been partly a good story within that, but can't deal with the enormity of this. That's the challenge that you've got. Okay, that's what my talk is going to be about. What's the world situation? It's summarized in this set of slides. Look at that on the left. Production just rocketing up. This is just over 15 years. Look at the slides on the right. Production per head, per capita up. Nitrogen fertilizers, we don't like them, but they've been incredibly effective. Irrigated land, more water, more technology. Pesticides let loose everywhere. This is the conventional picture. This is from the FAO, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. Has it been this great success? Yes, in some respects, but a disaster in other respects. We now know that. This is from the excellent work done by the Stockholm Resilience Center and colleagues around the world. This is their most recent version. They're saying, look, we as humans, not just in food, we as humans are exceeding what they call planetary boundaries. Climate change, land use, water, biochemical flows, ozone depletion, the seas, everything. This picture is a Venn diagram showing how in big issues of the planet and its boundaries, we're exceeding the limits. We're going into danger zone, red zone. The safe operating circle is to stay in the green. Now, food is one of the major drivers of this us growing beyond the planet and its boundaries. We know it's not succeeding in hunger. We've got just under 1 billion people hungry, the subject of your discussions. But yet more people are being fed, but there's still a vast amount of hunger. It's not a success story. It's got this major problem of under, over and malconsumption. It was unthinkable in 1900. And it's affecting certain areas much more than others. These are slides from the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, showing undernourishment as hitting certain areas more than others. Southeast Asia, much more than Europe. We don't have a huge hunger problem. We have some amount, but it's nothing like Africa or Asia or some parts of the Pacific. How has this situation emerged, this complexity, this set of contradictions? Well, if we go back 10,000 years, we'll see that from settled agriculture on the left-hand side of my slide here, through to the 19th century, the chemical revolution, Mendelian genetics, the great contribution of Mendel, the oil era, which really unleashed itself in the 20th century, the pesticides, the fertilizers, but was discovered in the 19th century, the green revolution, we don't like that in organics, but it's been very effective up to the modern point at some points. But now the livestock revolution, where more animals and feeding more animals, which people want to eat and grow. You in Germany grow a lot of, we too in Britain. is now putting livestock to compete with us. And so in the 21st century, the bottom right half bit of this slide, we've now got big competing visions of an ecological approach to production or another round of high-tech production. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But in the 20th century, the real issue has been driven by this, what we call the productionist paradigm. That if science and capital was unleashed on food, output would go up and distribution could be got right, so we didn't waste food near the farm, as still happens in the developing world, then more food would be available, food prices would drop, more people would be able to buy it, the poor would be able to afford it, health would improve. That's progress. That model of 1930s, 1950s science evidence is basically what we call the 20th century productionist paradigm. It's been very effective. I've written about it with my friend and colleague Michael Hiesman in our book Food Wars. And you in Germany and we in Britain were key architects of this. On the right, Justus von Liebig from Gießen. I've been to his laboratory there. I had a big meeting about ecological agriculture and nutrition there. And John Bennett Laws here in Britain, these were the pioneers of productionism, showing that you could treat the soil as chemistry. We don't agree with that in the organic movement, but they were the architects of the science that fed into the productionist policy paradigm. And people like these are British people on the left, Sir John Boyd Orr, a doctor, who, there he is smoking, look at that, but the first Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization, he believed in close links between nutrition and agriculture. The woman in the middle, a nutritionist, the man on the right, a soil scientist. People like this all over the Western world fed into the productionist paradigm. The work had begun with the von Liebigs and the John Bennett Laws, but these people pieced it together and made it modern. And the result has been this. The prices came down slowly until, and this is over 50 years, from 1961 till literally last month, to the end of 2016, and you see the oil price blip in the 1970s there. And there, on the right-hand side, you see us. The banking and oil crisis of 2007-8, it rose, and then it goes down, more production happened, so they thought the prices would come down, and then it's gone up, and then it's gone down. This is a new pattern of volatility. That's where we are now. And if you look in more detail, this is the latest, literally 3 days old, or a week when you get this, from the FAO. Look on the left-hand side, you see across different years how the price varies very fast. And if you look on the right-hand side, you see by commodities, the picture is very different. Look at sugar rocketing up, then going down. Dairy prices going up and going down. This is a volatile situation. Again, here's a long view. This I chose because I'm 69. I was born in 1948. Here this begins. This is World Bank data from 1948 to the present. And you can see here the oil price blip of the 70s there, and then also the modern blip that we're in now. But this is linking agriculture, fertilizers, energy, and minerals and metals. You can see how they're beginning to operate as one system. And it's the complexity of that system that we're dealing with now. Here is another long view. This is American data, basically the 20th century. If you look at the top half, the top slide, it's from 1909 to 1999. And you can see American total, US total food supply actually went down in calorific availability per person, calories per person per day, and it rose when intensive agriculture began to take off. It was high at the end of the 19th century because basically in America the population spread across virgin lands. They used the ecological wealth of naturally fertilized soils. On the bottom right, that's the bottom slide, is showing how total food expenditure of Americans went up in real terms, but in relative terms it dropped. It went from, in 1930, 1929, the average American expenditure for a household went from 25% down to about 10%. In my country, it's the same. We're about 9% of disposable income of consumers goes on food. They spend more on cars, houses than they do on food now. That's unleashed the consumer revolution. And here's what's happened in meat. Here's again this long data set of the United States Department of Agriculture. Basically, red meat is the big bit at the bottom, but you see as we go to the right, to the late 20th century, what grows is poultry. It's this light green there. And that's being fed not by pecking around in a little farmyard, but it's eating grain. Both of these are eating grain. So half the grain of the planet, nearly half, is being fed to animals to become our competitors. And livestock is the major source of greenhouse gas emissions within agriculture. And this is the latest survey or study from the FAO's unit that looks at this, Steinfeld and Gerber and colleagues. And you can see, if you look at the bottom, that twist down, the tail coming at the bottom, these are all the outputs, the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. Beef is way the biggest. Beef and milk are the biggest. So you see that dairy and meat are our problem. On the left-hand side, you see chicken and pig meat. They're much smaller than basically the ruminants. And they matter because of methane. If we look not just at CO2, carbon dioxide, but if we look at methane, which is much more powerful as a greenhouse gas cause, the ruminants are the big issue, much more than coal or biomass or landfill, big though those are. And if we look at this, you can see how the food system, not just agriculture, is emitting and using huge amounts of energy, that's the left-hand bar, and emitting huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. And here you see, very interestingly, the green is cropping, but look how energy consumption not so much goes into livestock. That's in mine, this sort of sandy colour, but when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, it's way the biggest. Retail and preparation, us cooking as consumers, uses a lot of energy, but it doesn't emit quite so much. So we've got a complicated picture emerging here. The productionist paradigm, architects of the mid-20th century, were obsessed, rightly, about reducing waste. They wanted to stop farmers growing food and it rotting, not being able to get from the farm to the cities. That's still the problem of the developing world, but in the rich world, we now have a problem of consumers being the main source of waste. And look at this growth. This is from the FAO's study, but the excellent work by Gustafsson and colleagues. You can see we in Europe, over on the left, look at that enormous consumer waste that we now have, the red in the bar charts. What's going on at the same time is what this slide is about, which is what we call the nutrition transition, the change in diets. How consumers, as they get richer, change what they eat, change the footprint, and not just eat more, but then begin to eat worse when they get very rich, like us in Europe or the United States. And these are three groups of countries. This is from the latest, the global panel on agriculture and nutrition. One of my colleagues, Professor Corinna Hawkes, was involved in that, co-writer of it. And this is data that they've done. I've put the references there. You can click on the websites, have a look at them. You can see how low to middle income countries are seeing a rise in consumption of soft drinks, non-alcoholic beverages, Coca-Colas and things, processed foods, and as they get richer, the bar starts going up. And when you're us in the high-income countries, well, they've stabilized. We're drinking more soft drinks, much too much, that's why we're fat. But this transition is the picture that the world's going through. That's where the world's food system is distorting not just the planet, but public health. And it's costing us a lot. It's costing us a lot in diet-related disease. This is from the Global Burden of Disease studies, which have been running from the World Bank and the World Health Organization. This is the latest version of it. And you can see in this slide, the green are the disease risk factors linked to diet. Diet is now the biggest cause of disease on the planet, bigger than tobacco or air pollution, big those are, bigger than HIV and AIDS. because these green bars are all diet related, so it has multiple impacts. And this is costing in money terms. This is too complicated for me to read, but basically what's happening, we in the rich world, you in Germany, us in Britain, in the United States, they spend 14% of GDP, gross domestic product, on healthcare. We in Britain and you in Germany spend less, we're more efficient, we don't have it so open to private companies to make profits out of. But in the developing world, the costs are just exploding. We can't afford to deal with it, they certainly can't afford it. And this nutrition transition is now putting a financial burden on the lower and middle income countries. They are the ones between 2010 and 2030, this is a Harvard and World Economic Forum study, you can click on it, which summarizes data. Those countries, the low and the poor and the middle income countries, are the ones who are going to be hit by the diet related costs in financial terms. And what's going on in the nutrition transition is a shift from eating real food, raw food and cooking it, to eating ready prepared foods. Now this is a problem for you in the organic food manufacturing sector. The green here, this is another excellent USDA study by people we know in our centre, showing the shift from low, middle and income to where we in the high income countries eat more and more of our foods from fresh sources. And what it means, the nutrition transition, is a change in what's eaten, how much and when, a shift from staple foods, raw foods, to processed foods, and the rise of what the big Brazilian nutrition epidemiologist, public health doctor, calls ultra-processed foods, foods which don't do anything for us or health, but they just taste nice, and they're sold and they're advertised and they're cheap. More fat, sugar and salt. And they are including more meat and dairy. And they are shaped by the consciousness industries, advertising, marketing, price, and what I call the consciousness industries. So even though we focus in public health on nutrition transition, it's a cultural transition. And this has environmental costs. If you don't know it, this TEEB study, the TEEB Agriculture and Food Studies, I put the link there. This is really interesting, looking at the environmental costs, the externalities of cost from agriculture and food. They're showing enormous costs and enormous threats to ecosystems from this new system, the food revolution, the apparent success of the productionist paradigm. And I don't need to tell organic audience the biodiversity loss is immense in this. We in the organic world tend to think we think we're good for biodiversity. We are good. It's one of the reasons I still support the organic movement. It's very important for protecting biodiversity. But if we're doing intensive agricultural organics, we're still pushing biodiversity out of the field into the edge of the field. And this figure is a long view. If you have a look at this later, you can see all over the world, and I put something from Germany there, that most of the historic diversity in our main human crops has been narrowed. We're eating less biodiversity. How can we get biodiversity into the field? It seems to me is a very important issue. And this is going to become even more important because of this. The world is being squeezed. The amount of land available per head is dropping. In the developed world on the left, the developing world starts off with even less land, bigger populations, and less land available, and the total world on the figure on the right. They go from 1970, 1990 to 2010, basically in a very short space of time in Darwinian terms, where we've got less land to feed people, but we're using more of it to feed animals, which is then associated with diet-related ill health. And here's the same argument put in a different figure from the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme. Look at their data, it's really, really useful. We in Europe at the bottom, you can see, but look at Brazil at the top. It's got a huge amount of land, but a lot of it's forest, and we need to keep it. They need to keep it as that. But they're cutting down the forest to grow soya and grow beef, to then export to China, to us, to feed pigs and so on. This is crazy. And we in Europe have got less than 1 hectare per person available already. We need to grow more forest to capture the carbon. And so the squeeze between the battle between crop, plants straight for us, and pastures, land for humans, for animals, which we then eat, or the meat and dairy we eat, this is the big crisis facing us. And this is also an issue of water. I'm sure you know it. The world is water stressed. We in Europe think we're not. Italy already is. People think Britain, it's wet. It is if you go to the north of Britain. But in southeast England, it's not. It's water stressed already. And that's where most of the horticulture and crops have been grown. We're facing a world of climate change. This is going to be the big thing. Organics is going to have to de-stress the water systems through organics. And here's just an illustration of why and how. This is a famous study done by a Dutch team I respect very much. They are the UNESCO team, of the amount of water embedded, literally used to create one 150 gram beef burger is 2,400 litres. And this shows where it comes from. And the majority, you see, is actually water used to grow the grain. But even if we just had a grass-fed beef burger, it would have to become much more expensive, and therefore people wouldn't have it as everyday McDonald's type food. So this is big messages back to consumers. And if we look in the world that eats rice, I was brought up in India, I like rice, we don't grow it in Britain, or not yet. A 1 kilo, look at the bottom, 1 kilo of milled rice has used 2,672 litres of water. This is a hugely at-risk crop. Of all the major crops on the planet faced by climate change, stressed by water stresses, it's going to be rice. And of course the picture I'm painting is that the environmental and the health connections are there. The nutrition transition isn't just about public health, it's about ecosystems, and it's about water. And you can see how at the bottom I put some old figures actually of how the world is shifting in how it's eating meat, is having an impact not just on its health but on its water use. So what are we going to do about this? That's what we've got to address. That's what you've got to address. What are we going to do about all of this? In one slide, this is it. We've got to think about ecosystems and human health. This is from a book I co-wrote with my colleague, a research fellow here at our centre, Jeff Rayner and myself, 4 years ago. It's called Ecological Public Health. But some people are arguing we need just another round of high technology, lab-based meat, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, industrial insects, the bottom left. Most of industrial insects being developed in the Netherlands and Europe are being for animal feed. Well, that could be interesting, but what are they being grown on? How are they being grown? Robotics, genetic modification. This is a nightmare for organics, but it's not everything. Maybe it's even possible to think, well, what within the understanding of genetics might be useful? Nutrigenomics is a hugely complicated issue, emerging that technical fixes are being offered to say, okay, you look to find your genes, my genes, what are you likely to get, which diseases might you get, and we'll tailor the diet to prevent those diseases. Well, who's going to control that? Who's going to be in charge of that data? Is it going to be Mr. Gates? Which company is going to be in charge of that? What data is going to do that? Is it going to be your doctor? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be some fantasist who thinks on the internet that they can sell you a new product? This is the high-tech route. Now, interestingly, big food companies are beginning to engage with this big complicated picture I've given you. We've seen the biggest food companies in the world doing what we call choice editing. So PepsiCo, not my favorite company on the planet, makes soft drinks, second biggest in the world. 6 years ago, it made a very interesting commitment to cut its greenhouse gases by 50% in 5 years as an experiment in Britain. It got to 35%. That's very interesting. Now, is an organic soft drink making that sort of commitment? Is it in plastic wrapping? Is it doing what Nestle is doing in its 60-40 plus campaign? I mean, these companies are looking long-term ahead. These are not my favorite companies, by the way. Marks and Spencer's is very interesting. Unilever is very interesting. But the food industry, the big food world, is beginning to address some of this. They worry about climate change. Here's the biggest pasta company in the world, Barilla, which produced this much-cited double pyramid. On the left-hand side, you can look at this later, eat more of what's at the bottom, eat less meat and dairy, you see at the top, and then it flips it and turns it upside down and says what's good for the environment, good for climate change, is to eat more fruit, vegetables, but don't eat so much meat and vegetables. And that's actually what the scientific evidence shows. If the West, we in Europe and certainly in the United States, ate a healthier diet, it would be better for the environment. We'd lower our footprint. What are governments doing to help this? Well, you in Germany, the RNE, your Council for Sustainable Development, began issuing very slight advice in the Sustainable Shopping Basket. It's revised it 2003, 2009, 2014. But this isn't central German government. This is an advisory group. It's good, I like it. But only Sweden decided to really tackle this, and it published, it's scientifically based, made by its nutrition, National Food Agency and its environmental agency. It produced this document, Environmentally Effective Food Choices, which is really the first only sustainable dietary guidelines. It was made to withdraw it in 2010-11 by the European Union, that said it was recommending Swedes to eat locally and eat sustainably, eat seasonally. And they said that went against the single market. This is crazy. The other countries, my own, Australia, have all tried this sort of getting a formal advice, and they've been beaten back by the lobbying of the meat and dairy industry. Most recently in the United States. If you don't know about it, the battle that went on for 2 years over the dietary guidelines for Americans, this is, they have to do it every 5 years, new official guidelines. It's supposed to set the framework for the United States and its agriculture. What they did was actually, the scientists recommended this in a huge report you can download, but then the Secretary of State for Agriculture rejected it and said, no, we only stick to just giving nutrition guidelines. The meat and dairy industry in the United States lobbied and succeeded. So what we're talking about is the need to get a sustainable diet from sustainable food systems. And the NGOs, civil society, are doing very interesting work. In the United States, in Germany, in Europe, these are fantastic people doing really interesting things. I particularly like the World Wildlife Fund at WWF. It's One Planet Living is really interesting. Have a look at it. And we in Britain have got some very good coalitions of NGOs, some very big, some small NGOs working together. And these are things you can just click on and look at. So what are my conclusions? What would the food system look like if it was designed around ecological public health? What should the organic food manufacturers aim for? More horticulture. Less meat and dairy, more horticulture. Less grain-fed meat. That means pasture-fed meat, pasture-fed milk. Milk in the summer and the early autumn, but not throughout the year in the same way. This is a revolution in thinking about food culture. This means different price signals. This is the sort of thing I as an academic can say, but you might think this is complete fantasy. This man is on a different planet. Unfortunately, I'm not. I'm on the one and only planet. We've got to get diversity into the field and to the stomach and get the rich world to eat less to allow the poor world to eat more. That has to be the vision. And I summarize it in the second bullet point under the goals as sustainable diets from sustainable food systems. This is taken from a paper and a talk, big lecture I gave at the OECD, where I think basically we've got the evidence there for doing what I'm saying, but we haven't got the political will. And that needs the industries, which is why I'm talking to you, to take a lead and to start saying, we've got to address this. And at the bottom, I've reminded us that actually 70 years ago, 80 years ago, our predecessors began to think like this. And I put here the Hot Springs meeting in 1943, when a framework was mapped out that Germany, Japan, all the countries after the war signed on to in creating the FAO and the UN after the Second World War, was called the productionist paradigm. We need to think really big again. We've got some of that in the Sustainable Development Goals, but we're not getting into the detail of what's got to change in food. And that's why I'm talking to you. That's what your conference has got to deliver. My problem, I'm a public policy analyst, is that the politicians aren't getting a grip of this. They're not under pressure. We can't expect politicians to lead unless we put them under pressure. And at the moment, they're just offering us more productivity. They're believing in big science. You in the organic movement know that may be very useful in some parts, but it's not going to resolve the social problems. There's a mismatch in food culture of aspirations, supply, and social distributions. And I think policymakers and politicians are frightened. They don't want to confront consumers because they've given them this very successful offer of cheap food and huge numbers of options in supermarkets. The rise of Aldi, Lidl and Netto, as you know. But I think shocks are coming. Shocks are there. And we must listen to the social movements because they're the key. So I send you good wishes. I've given you an enormous picture. I wish I could be there to discuss with you, but I send you my very good wishes as someone who has great affection and is a critical friend of the organic movement. Bye-bye. Bye-bye from London.